Oakland, California, James Y. Lee's Martial Arts Academy, a Sunday afternoon in October 1964. The air inside the dojo was thick with the smell of sweat and liniment. It was a small, cramped gym with aged wooden walls and fogged-up mirrors. There was nothing glamorous about it. Just serious men practicing serious martial arts. Bruce Lee was 24 years old. He wasn't famous yet. He wasn't the icon the world would come to know. He was just a Chinese instructor trying to survive in the United States, teaching kung fu to anyone willing to learn. His academy was modest. His students were few, but his reputation was growing. Whispers about a young Chinese man who moved differently, who thought differently, who challenged everything traditional masters taught. That particular afternoon, Bruce was in the middle of a demonstration for about 20 people. Students, curious onlookers, practitioners from other martial arts who had come to see if the rumors were true. At the back of the room, leaning against the wall with arms crossed, stood a man who seemed to occupy twice the space of anyone else there. His name was Bob Schneider. 110 kilos of pure muscle, 1.95 meters tall, shoulders so broad they blocked the light from the windows behind him. Bob was a collegiate wrestler, state champion. He had spent 4 years dominating opponents on the mat, using brute force and refined technique to crush anyone who crossed his path. He had come to the academy because a friend insisted. He had come skeptical. He had come believing that kung fu was dance, that Eastern martial arts were theater, that none of it would work against a real man. Bruce was demonstrating movements, explaining philosophy, showing how to redirect force instead of confronting it head-on. Bob watched with a half smile, occasional shakes of the head that made his thoughts clear. This was a waste of time. Pretty talk. Nothing practical. Then Bruce stopped and looked straight at Bob. There was something in Bruce's eyes that made people feel seen, really seen, as if he could read not just their body but their intentions, their fears, their doubts. "Bob, you look uncomfortable." Bruce's voice was calm, polite, yet carried a challenge. Bob straightened, uncrossed his arms. "I'm not uncomfortable, just finding all this very theoretical." Bruce nodded as if he had expected exactly that answer. "Theoretical? Interesting. You think what I teach doesn't work in a real situation?" Bob shrugged. "Never seen kung fu work against a real wrestler, against someone who actually knows how to fight." The room fell silent. The other students stopped what they were doing. This was a provocation. Everyone knew it, and everyone wanted to see how Bruce would respond. Bruce didn't get angry. He simply smiled. A small, almost amused smile. "Then let me show you something. Come here." Bob hesitated for a second, then walked to the center of the dojo. He moved with the confidence of a man who had never truly been hurt in a fight. His steps were heavy, deliberate. When he stopped in front of Bruce, the difference was absurd. Bruce was 1.70 mems, weighed 61 kilos. Bob was 35 kilos heavier and 25 centimeters taller. It looked like father and son. It looked unfair. Bruce looked up. "I'm going to show you something called the 1-inch punch. Have you heard of it?" Bob shook his head. Bruce continued. "It's a principle of force generation, not about distance, not about momentum, about structure, about energy transfer, about using the entire body in minimal space." Bob crossed his arms again. "Okay, show me." Bruce pointed to his own chest. "Put your hand here. Feel my structure." Bob placed his huge hand on Bruce's chest, feeling defined, but small muscles compared to his own. Bruce went on. "Now you. Put your hands out in front of you, at chest height, palms facing me." Bob obeyed, holding his open hands about 30 centimeters in front of his body. Bruce positioned himself. He stood less than 3 centimeters from Bob's hands. His own right hand was open, fingers relaxed, positioned exactly 2.5 centimeters from Bob's right palm. There was no room for a wind-up, no room for traditional acceleration. Geometrically, it was impossible to generate real force at that distance. Anyone who understood basic physics would know that. Bruce looked at Bob. "When I push you, you'll feel something. Don't resist. Just let it happen. There's a mat behind you." Bob looked back. There was indeed a mat leaning against the wall, about 3 meters behind him. He looked back at Bruce with amusement in his eyes. "You think you're going to push me 3 meters with a 2-centimeter motion?" Bruce didn't answer. He just breathed. A deep, controlled breath. Everyone in the room drew closer. 20 pairs of eyes locked on 2 men, the skeptical giant and the small, confident master. No one was breathing. Bruce closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, something was different. Absolute focus. Focus that seemed to pierce Bob, through him, beyond him. Then Bruce moved. But moved is the wrong word. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a traditional push. It was an explosion. His fist traveled perhaps 5 centimeters. Maybe. But what happened made no sense. Bruce's entire body compressed and then expanded in a fraction of a second. His feet rooted to the floor. His hips rotated. His back arched. His shoulders spun. All synchronized in a single pulse of energy that traveled through his body's structure and detonated into Bob's palm. The sound was sharp, like wood striking wood. Bob didn't slide backward. He didn't stumble. He was hurled. His feet literally left the ground. His body traveled 2.5 meters through the air before crashing into the mat with a dull thud. It wasn't a controlled flight. It was pure physics. Force transfer so violent, so concentrated, that his 110 kilos became irrelevant. Bob lay on the mat for 3 full seconds, eyes wide, mouth open, trying to process what had just happened. His hands were still tingling. Not pain. Shock. As if every nerve in his palms had been activated at once. He looked at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. Then he looked at Bruce. Bruce was in the same position, hands still extended, breathing calm, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if he had merely demonstrated that 2 + 2 = 4. Bob rose slowly, shook his head, trying to organize his thoughts. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no words. How do you describe being thrown by a force that shouldn't exist? How do you explain feeling 61 kilos turn into a controlled explosion? Bob was still processing. He touched his own chest, feeling his breathing. I didn't believe it until I felt it. Bruce nodded. That's why I demonstrate. Words are just concepts. Experience is knowledge. You felt it. Now you know. Bob looked around at the other people in the room. Everyone was stunned. Some were filming with amateur cameras. Others just stared. Bob looked back at Bruce. Teach me. Those 2 words changed everything. Teach me. It wasn't a casual request. It was surrender. It was the moment a man who had spent his life believing strength was everything realized he had been fundamentally wrong. It was the moment skepticism turned into faith. It was the moment Bob Schneider, wrestling champion, became a student. In the months that followed, Bob became one of Bruce's most dedicated students. He trained 6 days a week, arrived early, left late, relearned everything. How to move, how to distribute weight, how to generate power not from muscles, but from the coordination of the entire body system. He discovered that his years of wrestling had given him strength, but not efficiency, power, but not precision. Bruce transformed him, not by making him stronger, but by teaching him to use the strength he already had in ways he never imagined possible. Bob began applying kung fu principles to his wrestling, began defeating opponents not just by overpowering them, but by outmaneuvering them strategically. He became a different competitor, more complete, more dangerous. But the real change wasn't technical. It was philosophical. Bob had spent his life believing combat was about dominating the opponent. Bruce taught him that combat was about dominating yourself. That true power came not from crushing resistance, but from flowing with it. Not from force against force, but from intelligence against force. Years later, Bob would become an instructor. He would teach hundreds of students. And every time someone came in skeptical, every time someone questioned whether technique could overcome size, he would tell the story. The story of the day a 61-kilo man threw him 3 meters with a 2-centimeter motion. But Bob never told just the story of the punch. He told what came after, how Bruce spent the next 2 hours dissecting that single movement, explaining the biomechanics, showing how the feet rooted into the ground to create a solid base, how the hips acted as the central axis of a wheel, how the shoulders were catapults, how the breath synchronized everything, creating a wave of force that traveled through the body in perfect sequence. Bruce drew diagrams on the floor, used metaphors, compared the body to a whip, where each segment transfers energy to the next, amplifying it all the way to the tip. Compared it to a bow and arrow, where accumulated tension releases instantly. Bob wrote everything down, filled an entire notebook that afternoon. And Bob told how he went home that night and couldn't sleep. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling his palms still tingling, reliving that second in slow motion, trying to pinpoint the exact moment he lost contact with the ground. The moment his entire worldview reconfigured itself. He told how, in the days that followed, he began to see the world differently. Noticed how people moved, how they distributed weight, how they wasted energy in unnecessary movements. He saw inefficiency everywhere. And the more he saw, the more he understood what Bruce was trying to teach. Bob never forgot the way Bruce looked at him that day. Not with superiority, not with ego, but with the patience of a teacher who genuinely wanted to transmit knowledge. Bruce didn't need to prove anything. The demonstration was to open Bob's mind, to break barriers built by years of conditioning. The story no one would believe if there hadn't been witnesses. The story that fundamentally changed how he understood what was possible. The one-inch punch became legendary. Bruce would demonstrate it hundreds of times throughout his life. In competitions, in public demonstrations. At the famous 1964 Long Beach International Karate Championships, where cameras captured the moment for posterity. People watched in disbelief as much larger men were hurled like rag dolls. But for Bob, that afternoon in Oakland was different. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a spectacle. It was two people in a room, a truth being revealed, a life being redefined. Bob took weeks to fully process what had happened. He revisited the moment constantly, the way Bruce breathed before striking, the specific sound of the impact, the sensation of his feet leaving the ground. He began to understand that this wasn't just an impressive trick. It was evidence of a complete system of knowledge he hadn't known existed. He started asking questions he had never asked before. Why do we train strength if structure is more important? Why do we measure success by how much weight we lift if coordination determines real effectiveness? Those questions led him to study not just martial arts, but anatomy, physics, Eastern philosophy. Today, decades later, the video from that Long Beach demonstration circulates on the internet. Millions watch Bruce Lee pushing much larger men with tiny movements. They see, they are impressed, but they don't feel. Bob felt. He felt his 110 kilos become irrelevant. He felt physics transformed into art. He felt the exact moment when everything he thought he knew revealed itself incomplete. And that is the true lesson of the one-inch punch. Not that Bruce Lee was superhuman, not that he had mystical powers, but that he understood principles most people ignore. That efficiency overcomes brute force, that proper structure amplifies power, that 2 centimeters in the right hands are worth more than 2 meters in the wrong ones. Bob Schneider entered that dojo a skeptic. He left a believer, entered believing he knew how to fight, left knowing he had much to learn. And all it took was a moment, a challenge, a giant saying, "Hit me," and a master answering with 2.5 centimeters of pure, concentrated truth.